So welcome everyone to tonight's session here at SPI 520. We are very excited to have such a full room. It's actually truly impressive that so many of you came out with this weather during the 4-year vacancy and to discuss a topic which is, for the nerdy amongst us, pretty exciting, but maybe not so exciting for the majority. So I'm not sure what this says about you, but we're very grateful that you are here. So I'm joined by an excellent panel here, people that are sitting in the front row. One is still in the process of getting here out of the classroom, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But, maybe I should say actually who I am. My name is Stefania Milan. I am a professor of critical data studies at the Department of Media Studies here at the University of Amsterdam. And I'm here just holding the mic and giving a little bit of an introduction to the topic of tonight. And I'm here also in representation actually of a much bigger research team. Some of them are here for a research project that I'm going to proceed now to present. You see the logo there is called the Insight Project. I'm going to introduce them in a minute so they can wave at you and then you can ask them questions if you like afterwards. So digital technologies and public values. This is an equation that is often evoked by those amongst us who care about values and human rights in particular, but also by policymakers that like to think that people care about values, by technology companies who sometimes gesture towards and invariably take seriously the issue of, for example, human rights in technology development. But what we realize is that so little is known, in fact, about what hides in this, two words, public values. So where do we come from with this? A few years ago, I was in conversation with Paul Groth, a professor of data science, here at the School of Informatics at the University of Amsterdam, and we saw a great call for applications for a project that seemed to go very much in the direction of what we were discussing with each other. It was funded by the MVO, the Dutch Research Council, within a broader funding scheme called Responsible Innovation. And in particular, this funding line was called Designing for Public Values in a Digital World. So the idea there was to fund research with taxpayers' money, by the way, because that's what the MVO normally distributes, to explore how do we bring about societal innovations that enjoy broad societal consensus. How do we deliver better product and services? So the focus was really on technology development and ethical and social aspects, and trying to embed this ethical thinking from very early on in the process of development so that it can actually influence the design of technologies themselves. So some of the key words there were proactive design and development perspective, multidisciplinarity. So you see that you already referred to the disciplines that we straddle here, but also societal relevance and valorization. So we put together a project that has a bit of a long title, Making the Hidden Visible, Co-Designing for Public Values in Standard Making and Governance, studied during the pandemic. So we've been going for a while. There's several parts, and what I'm going to present tonight with the help of our speakers here is only a little tiny part of the project as a whole. The project is brought to you by, as I said, media studies, informatics, but also a couple of other partners that we somewhat lost along the way. That's why they're a bit in brackets. The law school at Groningen, and NEN, which is the Netherlands Standaardisatie Institute, so the Dutch institute that takes care of standardization processes. So why did we, when we were presented with the challenge of coming up with some research ideas about innovation, why did we pick standards of all things? Because standards are really, very well hidden in the technology stack. And they're not exactly at the core of citizen concerns, but they are indeed at the heart of the internet ecosystem. We know that they secure network interoperability, they guarantee security and trust in the data, they promote trade flows, but they also help creating a level playing field for the industry. In a way, they are a perfect object of research if you, care about society and technology, because they do weigh together technical aspects and societal factors. So in a way, they are political in nature, because when you act at this intersection, you make choices that have consequences. But the legitimacy of standards and standard making, meaning, do we approve of standards, if you want, as technology users, is somewhat jeopardized by the fact that standards are technical, they are somewhat boring, and they're also very well hidden. They're quite concealed. So for us, thinking about responsible innovation could not be done without looking at standards as well, and seeing how standards then can incorporate values. So we wanted to connect public values and standard making, investigating how can we do that? Can a value-based perspective influence standard making? We wanted to look at technology and people, including but not limited to designers, developers, consumers, and policymakers. And we wanted also to look at the level of governance, because standard making intervenes in the governance of technologies. We picked two amongst the many variably controversial technologies that we see in our daily life today. They are the 5G, fifth generation of mobile networks, and digital identity management systems. As a citizen of the Netherlands, or someone that simply is based in the Netherlands at the moment, you realize from your own practice and from your daily whereabouts that you encounter both of them several times a day. Probably your mobile phone, if you have a state-of-the-art mobile phone, uses a 5G network, but you know that, for example, 5G has been a little controversial recently, including, when we started our project, it was the early days of COVID. There were a lot of talks that, people know a little bit about technology, sounded very naive, but nonetheless, these are concerns that we take seriously. Some people believed, in a way or another, that 5G could carry or was somehow related to the pandemic, so the virus itself. And digital identity then is something that we encounter when we go to the hospital for healthcare, when you want to enroll your child in school, and so on and so forth. So technology is out there, standards are part of it, but we don't know so little about it. But then what about values? So, when we were trying to put together the proposal, I actually literally asked the MVO, what values do you mean with public values? And they really didn't have a good answer for us. At some point, they came down with Dutch values. And, I've been living in the Netherlands for over a decade, but I'm not sure I really know what Dutch values would be, and what manner do Dutch values are specifically Dutch? Or how do they differ from European values, from whatever else type of perspective you want to, or geographical, cultural perspective you want to adopt? So for us, we translated it into human rights, which it's a specific type of translation. But really, we wanted to know more about what is in these values. And on top of that, we also realized that in a lot of the policy discourse out there, there is the assumption that people care about values in technologies, about privacy, for example. And okay, they might care, but do they actually act upon them as well? Or is it more like an aspirational idea that we have, but that we don't really by in practice? So really the question was, what values are we talking about here, and do we really care? Now, by the way, we have a problem as a society when it comes to standards in our imaginaries. I went to Adobe stock photos to prepare these presentations, and I typed in IT standards, and whatever I came up with was quite weird. But then when I typed in values, I got this. This was not values in technologies, but when I put it on values, I got a kind of creepy unicorn. So I decided that I still put it there because it probably means something in relation to values. So what I'm going to present here tonight, and not really present, I want to just give you a glimpse of it. You have printed copies, both in Dutch and in English, there on your way out. And you also have a digital copy, by the way, if you want to download it. So we're going to discuss that. But to be sure, we have done a little more than that. So if you want to know about the computational part, talk to Paul and Effie. They're sitting here in the second row. So I'm not going to touch into that. I definitely don't feel very well qualified to do so, but they're doing a very interesting component of the project as well. But what we have done from the media studies perspective, actually adopting real and interdisciplinary perspective rather than just media studies, was also to try to play with awareness raising and try to engage citizens in discussions about values, standards, and technologies broadly defined. So among the various initiatives, also with the help of what became later the Critical Infrastructure Lab, we have Neil somewhere, just entered the room over there, is also going to join us on stage later. We played with art. So maybe some of you have seen this. It was on display. This was Krabby. It's known as Krabby, but it's actually an antenna that mimics the functioning of one specific component of the 5-gene network or function, the beamforming. And we wanted to basically put it there so it's something interactive. I spare you the details. Maybe Niels can tell you something more later if you're curious. But it was placed at the entrance of the OBA, the Amsterdam Public Library on Oosterdok, where a lot of people go by on a daily basis. We're there for several months. And it was a great conversation starter to get citizens to think about what they know about, for example, this technology, but also how do they feel about it? And then what values would they associate with it, or would they want to see represented or translated into technology that works? But back to the boring part, which is the statistics. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of some of the figures that you find already here, and I'm not really going to go through the 45 pages, very tiny written, that we have here. But just to get you to get a glimpse, and then the speakers are going to help us to zoom on in various specific aspects that they found interesting. So the question was really, how do Dutch people, what do Dutch people, find important when it comes to digital technology? And do they feel involved in the tech development, and in particular in the development of standards? So we couldn't do it ourselves. We don't have the capacity to have a statistically representative sample of the population. So we involved a great agency. Where are you guys sitting? Disappeared. Over there. So big shout out to what was then INO Research and now became Ipsos INO Research, correct? And they are the ones who actually gave legs to this survey. So they are those that have a huge panel of citizens. Maybe some of you are also part of the panel, so they could reach out to 2,154 Dutch citizens, people that have voting rights in the Netherlands, in the period between the end of July and the 10th of August. Now, if you look at the period in the middle of the holidays, you understand the power that these people have and how good an agency they are and how good they are at their work. So just to give you a sense of what we found, so we studied some sort of broad stroke questions. Do you like to use digital technologies? Of course, it's good to talk about values, but you have to start also to understand what is actually the practices that on the daily basis see people engaging with technology. So unsurprisingly, you might say, 70% of Dutch people like to use digital technology. It's basically the three green columns over there. You have the gradient. I mean, not all of them might like it very, very, very much, but probably you are part of the 27% if you're here tonight. There's still a good 14% that prefers to stay shy of technologies. What do people care about? Values, right? So people care essentially about two things: safety and privacy. I don't know whether you can read that, but I can, for you, it's in the report. Cyber attacks and cybercrime is a big concern for 71% of the population. And the second comes privacy, with the use of personal data and information by companies specifically. The third, with 43% of citizens being concerned about that. By the way, multiple answers were possible here, up to 4, is the safety and the well-being of children and minors. What I personally surprised by is that the environmental impact of all of this, all the technology that we use so much, only concerns 12% of the people. Yet in the Netherlands there is quite some debate about data centers, for example, and this technology to thrive needs to have data centers, but also the scarce transparency of the design, and somewhere in between, concerning only 19% of the population, is that digital technologies treat certain vulnerable groups unequally. And 19% of people probably are those that are concerned with the scandal of the Tuslakan affair, right? To me, it's a bit surprising that these very key values, if you want, you can translate them into values, are actually scoring so little. They come really after other concerns in people's scale of interest and worries. Now, this is instead what do you find important, and again, we see it somewhat mirrors of what was said before. So sustainability comes somewhat at the end of the list. Safety and privacy are driving people's preferences. But 40%, going back to the human rights, believe that digital technologies do not pay enough attention to discrimination and human rights more in general. Unsurprisingly, the more on the left side of the spectrum these people are, the more they're concerned by human rights and discrimination. But then, do we actually act on the values? And I include myself in this, although I was not part of the interviews. But so we wanted to see whether people actually act on their values. Because one thing is to state, well, I care about something. And the other thing is to practice, for example, critical consumerism. Do I actually, when I buy a device, am I driven by values or am I driven by design, interoperability with my laptop or whatever else, or coolness or price? And in fact, as it turns out, the biggest, the front runners when it comes about the considerations when you bought your last mobile phone is, sorry, I cannot really read, the slide is very tiny, 54% care about price and user friendliness, the brand, the hardware specification, and I don't really go through the entire list. Sustainability is very at the very bottom, only 2% care about that. Possibility for easy repair, only 2%. And then how people do perceive standardization processes, but especially the influence that they can have in the design of technologies. Well, unsurprisingly, as you can see, most of the people are positioned on the left-hand side of the spectrum. So people believe that they can have actually very little influence about the design of technology. Again, to give you a little bit more data from the report, there's really a wealth of data there. 55% think they have a lot of knowledge about technology, but at the same time, 60% think they actually do know where to raise concerns. The two probably are, they can be seen as a bit contradictory. And 63% actually think that their opinions in any case do not matter, because whatever they care about, someone else is going to decide for them, be it policymakers, standard bodies, of especially technology companies. So I hope at least I made you curious about the report, and invite you to skim through and read and whatever you find most interesting there. But without further ado, I would like to invite our 5 panelists, plus a 6th actually, to the stage. And I'm going to briefly introduce them. Sorry. So we have Dawes Smith, who is project manager, if you want to come here. Thank you very much. You can also go maybe. Project manager of public tech at the Municipality of Amsterdam. But in the past also, he has a long CV. All the CVs, by the way, are in a way in a short format on this Spy500 website. So I just pick on some of my favorite roles that these people have had. He was also a privacy officer at Fairphone. But I know here you're representing the Municipality of Amsterdam tonight. Then we have Marjolein Lanze, assistant professor.
Oh, yes.
A philosophy of technology at the University of Amsterdam, but not just a philosopher, also active in a variety of fields, including she's a board member of Bits of Freedom, that many of you surely know, and as well as a member of the Amsterdam Platform for Privacy Research. Then I would like to invite Bart Karstens, senior researcher in digital society at the Rathenau Institute in The Hague, who is also joined by his colleague Emma Hoos, who is sitting here in the front row. Then we have Catherine Garcia, senior advisor on institutional relations at the Internet Society. So she's busy with, sorry about this, I just want to avoid flipping over there. Catherine is busy with global internet policy and advocacy for the Internet Society. Some of you might know, maybe you can say something about that when you start speaking. And Niels ten Hoover, who is assistant professor of the European Studies Department here at the University of Amsterdam, is also one of the co-director and founder of the Critical Infrastructure Lab, and last but not least, was also part of the Insight team before he departed for more exciting adventures. So thank you very much for being here. What expects you now? I'm gonna call on each of them to basically pick on whatever they think is relevant, interesting, and important, and comment on the findings. So really we ask them to help us to contextualize the findings that came from our survey. So give a little bit of heart, leg, and soul to the statistics. So I would like to go in the order that I have you here. So Douwer, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you very much, Stephanie, for inviting us all. I thank you all for being here. I think your starting remark, I must say, that when we talk about digital technology and social values, that it's a little bit of a nerdy thing to be interested in that. I don't agree, you know, when maybe because of my prejudice, but also coming to this kind of gatherings, you always, or even other gatherings, you always hear people talking a lot like, digital technology is going to transform society, how we live, the cities at scale. It's super important. And then the other part is the public values. Is it's a little bit lost, it feels sometimes. Like we feel democracy is threatened, the way the societal fabric works is threatened. So public values are more important than ever. So when we bring those two together, I think we are basically at where it's at, what we should be discussing. So everybody is right to be here, I wanted to say. I work for the municipality, as you said in the introduction, and I work also on the part of ethics and basically working with different groups in the government to think, how can we put these public values into the technology that we create ourselves? And this is, of course, very difficult. The value is not part of the technology. It's, of course, always part of the perception of the person creating the technology. And very often, because of the nature of technology, we find that people don't perceive any value in it, that it's neutral. So a big part of my work is basically reminding people that their work is very much value-loading, that difficult decisions have to be made. And when I read the report, I think I must indeed say I'm not so much surprised by the outcome. I feel much as a support. Like a lot of the numbers are in there correlates to the statistics I know at least of Amsterdam. For instance, it's a well-known statistic here in Amsterdam that 20% of the people living in the city are illiterate. And illiterate sounds very heavy, but it is also because the definition of illiterate has been broadened in recent years to include people who don't know how to deal with technological devices. So there's, of course, a big bunch of people in the city who know how to read and write very well, but because they don't know how to turn on a computer and do things on a computer, they're also considered illiterate. And that's 20% of our city. And we are not in a position like some companies that we can say we do some kind of market segmentation where we think that, you know, like I don't know, some company could say, we're going to make a fridge that's only for these wealthy people who are interested in technology, like this segmentation you have in your report, and know how to operate it. No, as a city, you work for everybody by definition, and everybody should have equal rights to technology. And I find that painfully pointed out in this report to see how many people not only consider themselves or like kind of disqualify themselves as having a proper understanding of digital technology, but also like I think 14% it is that people say, I really hope not to use it. Like I prefer not to use it as much as possible. And I think these kind of messages are sometimes lost in the context of a city where we have to develop this technology, roll it out, and expect everybody to join. We have a big task as a city here also to keep these people on board, but also more and more to think of other pathways. How can we keep the city accessible, understandable, and people part of this society without them having to use any kind of technology or digital technology. And especially the part of understandable, I think, is something, well, we can talk about it later, but I feel personally also that it's something that's very much under pressure in a time of large language models or AI, where the causality of how things work in a city gets more and more lost, and people are kind of left to decisions, random decisions that we find very difficult to explain. Like, why are you subjected in this kind of way to these kind of rules? So the understandability where you know as a citizen why certain decisions are made about you is going to be very difficult, I think, in the coming years. So this report helps me a lot, I must say, also to remember my colleagues, but I think hopefully also other people working in government, that there's really a clear segment of the population that are under threat of becoming a second-class citizen. And the public value that we elected, that how we're going to deal with it is up to us also to think about. Off the cuff, these are my first remarks to start with. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I remember when you came in, you had a very interesting point also on standards, but we can get to that later. And by the way, there's going to be room for questions. So, but I would like to ask you to just take notes or mental note of your questions, so that we can first go for first round of the table, and then you have the chance to open the discussion. So, thank you very much, Dawer. The next in line is Marjolein.
Yes, thank you, Stefania. Thanks for inviting me too. I'm sorry, I'm going to be the ethical pain in the ass. That's our job as ethicists, I think. I'm really curious about the public values that we've been talking about, and that was also the angle that I wanted to discuss here today. Because, of course, the report is called Public Values, and I'm super curious to what they are. In philosophy, we don't conceptualize them, actually, at all. And I don't think it was the first call that NWO got about the meaning of what public values actually are. I think lots of people have made that call or written that email about what public values actually mean. So my job is in the business of the social dimensions of values and the democratic values, the things that we call democratic values and so on. And I guess they're very close to some of the things we think are public values. Now, what's more, because that's the conceptual part, like what do they actually mean? And when we look at the values in the report, how do these actually translate, or how do they sort of relate to what we think public values actually are? I want to talk about that in a second. But of course, first things first, the report is maybe not so much about public values as a philosophical investigation, but rather what values does the public value? What do they actually care about? And how does that show in percentages and so on? I'm very much interested in empirical research and so on, and I implement it in my philosophical work as well. When we think about, for instance, what social dimensions of privacy are, or social dimensions of autonomy, and all those kinds of things. And actually, I was a bit worried when I saw this survey. Because all the values that we've been spending so much time on for the past couple of years in ethics and philosophy of technology, for instance, were at the very bottom of concern. So sustainability, justice, like all these things that actually should matter also from the public point of view, like that are deeply, deeply social and intertwined with our like social environments or public environments. They're at the very bottom. And I was like, okay, moral call to action. Note to self, next year, spending more time in public debate, bringing all of these important values to the fore. They actually should matter. In the next survey, they should be at the very top. Not only privacy and security, they are super important, but we also know that a lot of other things are at stake right now. When we talk about the production of AI, the exploitation of labor, the exploitation of the planet, the exploitation of the climate, social justice issues that go well beyond how justice is conceptualized in this report as accessibility and functionality, but really deeply about even if the technologies are functioning, even if they are accessible, they can still be deeply unfair and unjust to certain groups of people simply because our society is like that. And technologies are not just mere tools, but they're deeply embedded in our society, and they mediate how we look at each other. They also mediate our values. They create different things we are concerned about. And so I looked at the list and then I thought, ooh, all these very individualistic outlooks on what we actually should value when we think about technology, that should really change. We should really think about the values that actually translate better to our social understandings of the world around us. And that means also a different conceptualization, I think, of what technology actually is. And that really relates to what Douwe just said. Technologies aren't neutral, they're deeply value-laden. And they really mediate how we relate to each other and ourselves, and all these important public issues, actually. So, for next year, but also in thinking about what values actually are, I'm also offering here, on behalf of the philosophy department, I'm also seeing Annemijn Kwikkers in the back, who works on the ElgoSoc project. They're also concerned with public values and so on. Recruit us, because we want to think along about how we can change this for the survey that will come out next year.
Thank you so much. I have bad news for you. We have no funding for another survey, but you never know, right? At least we scratched the surface. And by the way, it will be also very, very interesting to see how this similar questions or the same survey, what the result will be if we go to other parts of Europe, for example, especially now because we're going to have a European election coming up. But for that we need more money. But we're working on that. Bart, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and also thanks for inviting us. The Rathenau Institute. This is actually an institute in The Hague that is kind of think tank doing research into new technology. And studying the impact of technology on society, in the field we call it technology assessment. And we have used the notion of public values a lot in our research. We actually pride ourselves that we put it on the agenda in a more broader societal context, so even the government has an agenda called value-driven digitalization. And a report that's very important landmark is urgent upgrade from, I think, 2017. And it really follows up on your point you made from what kind of framework of public values are we actually talking about. And that report, Urgent Upgrade, took a really empirical approach, just to see what kind of issues are all out there. And it turns out that this we just gathered, from a lot of sources we gathered a lot of issues. Then we tried to really bottom up, like a completely inductive way, try to classify them. And then we came with, let's say, with a lot of issues, we could classify it in 7 themes. And those themes have really gotten the label of this is the list of public values. While they're not all public values. That's another problem, but okay. There are some public values in it, and it really opened the way to also always you have privacy and autonomy, privacy and security, I'm sorry. Those are the most, let's say, center of attention. This report again proves that in the, let's say, the public eye, those are the 2 most important things. But one of the main messages from this report, Urgent Upgrade, is, well, those are very important, but a lot of other things are very important as well. So, still, it is not a finished business. We are involved in a research project that tries to make a conceptual leap to get into a more, let's say, encompassing framework of what public values are, and to extend this, let's say, this first approximation of, let's say, some core values and maybe instrumental values or issues related to that in, let's say, one framework. So I'm really curious about, that's my first question, the actual choices you made in coming up with this list of values. I mean, one is liability, for example. It seems to me that's more like a norm instead of a value, and the real value behind that is, let's say, responsibility or something like that. Another one is autonomy. According to what I have read about autonomy, freedom of choice is, let's say, the central issue in autonomy. But the way you frame the question, you have questioned in your survey, the freedom of choice is not in the definition. So I'm really curious also for the research we're doing on can we come up with a better conceptualization of public values? What the choices you have made and what the ideas were behind that. Another thing is that in the introduction of the report, you say that you want to use the results of this research for the standardization process. And I really wonder, how are you going to do that? I have an idea, which I can maybe help you, but I'm first curious to hear from yourself what's your idea about, how can we use this, let's say, value survey in order to get to technical standards. A third and final point I wanted to bring in was what the research actually yields. I mean, it's a very general approach. Do you find privacy important? It's not really like, do you find privacy important in some kind of specific situation? We have a discussion in our institute as well, because most of the work that we have done on public values is qualitative in nature, and we are working on a project to do actually what you have done. That's a more quantitative approach to public values. And we have a discussion, what can you extract from it? Can you go into, let's say, causal explanations? I mean, I was struck by that many people apparently want to minimize the use of digital means in their lives. Quite a huge number. I was very surprised by that. So, and then I want to know why. What's the reason that causes them to want to minimize the... So, can you dig with such kind of survey method a layer deeper into kind of causal analysis? Have you done that, and is it possible? So yeah, those are the three things I am really curious and interested in to hear your opinion.
Well, thank you very much, Bart, and I hope to get the time to get to some of these points, also because it allows us to then explain what is the next step in this research project. But I'm going to park them, I took note, and go to Catherine now.
So yeah, I'm gonna start pointing out some of the results of this survey you conducted over the summer, because that connects to the comments I want to make. Starting with the very eye-opening 63% of the survey citizens that think they have very little influence on the development of the technology standards. Moving to in their opinion, which are the organizations or agencies that have biggest influence on the development of digital technologies, seems to be that 84% believe that are the tech companies. And there is, let's say, a slightly 19% that believes international organizations like in the EU or the UN, where I actually follow some of the policy processes, have some influence. And I will start there, saying that, to give you an example, the International Telecommunications Union have about 11 standard groups. And they're very known. Some of them are working on metaverse, some others are working on the new IP, and you name it. At the moment, there have been some regional meetings, which we have been following closely from the Internet Society, and at the end of October, they will gather together to adopt new resolutions on these standards. What's interesting is that these are mostly multilateral processes, so meaning is high involvement of states. State sends delegations, and so each country has a say on the new proposals, the new resolutions, and even new study groups that will be created. Increasing these 11 study groups on the standards is not a great idea, because they already do some sort of they have a clear understanding where they're going. But on the contrary, I will say it will be important to envisage how to include a more multi-stakeholder participation. So that connects to the study. And I will say there are, of course, in the processes of that I have explained, there are ways to, the interesting part will be how to include this, civil society or multi-stakeholder participation beyond the state's delegations. There has been some progress, though, I have to report, and I will say this at the all UN level, but mostly in ITU this year, when we were gathering in Geneva, there is the need to include human rights approach to the standardization. Now, it's just a moment in which the conversation has wrapped up. So basically, there is a lot of sustainable development goals kind of discussion around, but also in terms of values and how these standards will include values that respect human rights. So there has been a good, I would say, 2024, a good kickoff of the 2024. Now, I think it's indeed a good timing also to shape that discussion. And so I think this report can do a lot to influence that process and good a starting point. I will leave it there for now, but have more comments later.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I guess this offers a great stepping stone for Niels to come in. Please.
Hi all, I'm Niels, your local standards researcher. And for me, this report is actually a solution to one of the problems I have in my life. And luckily, I have many problems. We have many things to do, but please allow me to explain why. So part of my work that I started setting up community radio stations in Ethiopia. After that, I was like a bit sick and tired that we needed to train a lot of people on computers and equipment that needed to be repaired, etc. So then we started to develop apps for mobile phones in which we could do recording, editing, and publishing. But then we found out, wow, there are a lot of concerns with human rights involved when it comes to mobile telephony, especially when it comes to surveillance and censorship. So then we're like, oh, wow, maybe we can address this at a bit more fundamental level so that the people that are human rights defenders that use these devices don't need to take all these extra precautions. So maybe we could make the infrastructure of the internet more human rights respecting. So off I went into internet governance, particularly to the Internet Engineering Task Force, the standards body of the internet. And there I asked, can we make human rights considerations an inherent part of internet standard setting? And they said, well, why don't we try? So we went out, Corinne Kath and I, to develop these guidelines. And this became actually an internet standard, RFC 8280 for the local nerds. And once we had that, we said, okay, now implement it. We're almost there. And then the company said, computer says no. So they were very interested in legitimizing their role through human rights, but they were not ready to alter their practices. And they said, that's not our role. So then often we look at regulation, but regulation, as you know, is a post hoc endeavor. That's something that happens after the fact. And standardization is something that happens before the fact. It's a part of the shaping of technology. So, and this is why this document is so important, is because it says the people think the value should be in the technology, but they don't know how to influence it, as said. And it should become part of that standardization. Well, luckily, we have been working with the Office of the High Commissioner in the UN on creating this report. And in the ITU, people are taking up this call. But at the ITU, is everyone a bit familiar with the ITU? As you all know, it's the oldest still functioning international organization. Yes. When was it established? 1865, in the year that the first transnational cable was laid across the Atlantic Ocean. So imagine, this was before the steam engine. Right? No, so these were sailing ships going from Newfoundland and from the other side, and they tried to lay this 3 times, but the cable broke. So they went on, connected it, and then it functioned. And did you know for how long it functioned?
6 hours.
Actually, it was 3 weeks, but 6 hours up to spec, because there were no proper standards. So they thought, let's set up an institution, which was then the International Telegraph Union, now the International Telecommunications Union, which has become part of an agency of the UN since 1949. But it is a very political union. So where for instance, Russia said, Russia has been banned from taking up new positions, and they said that the human rights of Russians were affected because they could not be elected. But of course, this was a bit of a travesty, because Russia was put out because they had been attacking telecommunication infrastructure in Ukraine. So here you see how human rights in different fora are not necessarily a panacea or a solution, because also the first internet standard that implemented RFC 8280 are good ideas for let's make the internet more human rights protecting, was that it was a human right to keep arms born and kept against all manners of attackers, such as nation states and lawyers. So you saw that also in the IETF, the understanding of human rights is very varying. So non-state institutions, such as the Internet Engineering Task Force, are not a solution to implementing human rights. The ITU, not necessarily. But we probably should not forget that rights is not something we can attain, but something we can continue to fight for. And this report shows us that we need to keep on fighting for the rights of users in the production of technology in standards bodies.
So thank you very much, Niels, and thank you very much, everyone, for contributing to the discussion from your specific vantage point. And I'm sure that you could also add, we can have another round, but I would like, in the interest of time, by the way, there are drinks afterwards, but it's now your chance to ask these specialists your questions about standards and standard making. And then if there's chance, I go back to your questions. And I can tell you also what we plan to do next with the project and why we need your help. So I have a mic here, and I am supposed to bring it to you. Questions? Hands? By the way, you use a couple of acronyms, Niels, that maybe needs to be broken down.
What would you like me to break down?
It's very good at that. So you talk about, you probably explained what IETF is, but you didn't explain what RFT is. Sorry, yeah.
But instead of just explaining what I said, maybe I add some stuff from recent research. And it's a lot of fun because I got some new research I can share with you. And so standardization goes back 3 centuries before Christ in the Haparan civilization in the Indus Valley to what is now called Pakistan. But modern standardization actually started for 3 reasons. And one of it was to produce safety. And that was because, here you got them again, steam engines. With the rise of steam engines, they started to implement these engines, just as we implement chips now everywhere. Steam engines were implemented everywhere, but because there was no standard, steam engines exploded quite regularly with all kinds of disasters, and most notably riverboat explosions were quite common. And this was a problem, so a standard was invented to set the thickness of steam engines. And so since then, it was actually expected that standards produce security. So now fast forward to 2023, we've been doing a quantitative analysis of standard setting of 5G and telecommunications in general, and found out that whereas standardization is expected to produce safe standards, we found that a significant amount of insecurities were not addressed. If they were in the interest of nation states, to surveil populations. So whereas we expected standardization to produce security, it actually does not. And what we hear a lot is that China is expected to introduce backdoors into technology. And this is a way why we should not use Huawei technologies. What we found is that the people that refuse to implement fixes to backdoors are not Chinese companies, but are actually from Europe and the United States. Also, when we look at the build-in of surveillance infrastructures, so-called front doors for lawful intercept, we found that these requests did not come from China, but again from European countries and from North America. But on the other hand, these interfaces were implemented by equipment vendors from everywhere around the world, including China. So if we look at the introduction of infrastructural insecurities, both in terms of legal surveillance and illegal surveillance, standardization is not necessarily producing security. And where this is not done by China. So quite interesting and good to see that there is a lot to increase and why we need to shine a light on these processes of standardization as a main means of the production of technology in society.
Thank you, Niels. We have a couple of questions. I see one hand there. There was one over there. So Martin is going around with a microphone. If you can introduce yourself very briefly so that the speakers know who they're speaking to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these wonderful discussions. Gijs Vermaan, and I work in Tilburg. I find it interesting that Douwe talks about sort of the level of the municipality and Niels about the level of nation states and international relations. And I was wondering, at what sort of level do you expect people to do something differently, normal citizens? Does Niels, for instance, also expect citizens to be involved in standard settings in complicated bodies hidden away in EU policy or international policy, or do we expect citizens to be part of, I'm not making this up, participatory processes at municipality to build technologies which are not necessarily standards? So at what kind of areas do we expect citizens to do something?
First response, I think this is a little bit like I was surprised when I came to page 44 and then the report ended. I was like, where's the conclusion? Like, where do we go from now? It felt a little bit like this question is hanging in the end of the report, where we conclude a big portion of the citizenry doesn't really want to engage with digital technology, and even bigger portion doesn't qualify themselves as knowledgeable about it. And then we come to the hardest conclusion and they all have no idea basically where to influence standards. Now what is a little bit the question that is hanging there. And to me it also feels a little bit like when you talk about the thickness of steam engine machines, I have no idea where to start. And maybe it's not necessary anymore in 2024, but I feel the same, and I can imagine a lot of people feel the same about all these digital standards. I have really no idea. And partly I think this is deliberately also because technology is designed to put people, away from how it works. It's abstracted to a big layer. We only look at a little bit of piece of glass and plastic in our hand, and it should just work, period. And on the other hand, it's also a little bit like, is this really the part that we should put the citizens first and put the responsibility there, where all the work that's being done by China or the US and all these very knowledgeable people, this is basically the people that should know this. So also if I talk only about the practice that we have in Amsterdam, when it comes to developing technology and look at values, how we make part of that technology, we would always say, we want to make sure that we understand the values that are part of the audience, but it's up to the technicians, up to the people, designers, to put it and check if it's really part of the technology. That it's not necessarily something that you can make a responsibility of the general community as a whole. That's my answer.
So you're asking very complex questions in a very simple way, which is why you're a philosopher. Thank you, Gijs, for that. So it's so what you're asking first is a question about democracy, and then a question about the nature of technology. And I will just maybe just go to the second because I know a bit more about it. Technology is a way to standards are a way to stabilize technology. So. And that's why Lawrence Bush, they form a very known standards researcher called Standards Recipes for Reality. Because they allow us to get grips of all the complexity. What standards bodies are very good for is find a way where technology is produced. Because we are, and I talked a lot about technology to people, and people said, oh, I'm not technical. Well, Aristotle said, you're not right, because technology is what makes you human. Techne. We are the rational being that uses tools. And tools are technology. They are a means to an end. But the way that these complex technologies are used, I will not ask from everyone to understand every technology. And frankly, we can't. If anyone says, I understand how my laptop works, they're lying. There are a million lines of code to allow the hardware to interoperate with the software in so-called firmware, in particular buses, and then Linux or even more proprietary softwares function. So no one completely understands, but I think from a democratic perspective, we should be able to understand, because that is the first precondition to make requests to that technology. So, and standardization is a process to come to terms with it, because once you live up to a standard, you can certify something. And every one of you will have seen this symbol CE, where the C looks a bit like the E, and that means it lives up to European standards, to agreements and norms that we in Europe have said, this is safe and secure to use. It will not harm your health, it will not harm your environment, you can use it. And we should go ahead with many more digital standards to say, this is safe and secure to use. But up to now, the standards bodies that produce internet and computing standards says, no, we are just there to facilitate industry collaboration. But we also don't want you to regulate, because then you might hamper what we do. And what I say to these standards bodies is, dear standards bodies, you can have your cake or eat it. So either you're asking other people to set the rules for you, to which you need to live up, or you're going to take up the role of experts that you are and tell us to what values and what the intended implications of your standards are. So standards bodies should become an inherent part of the democratic process. And they are becoming so, because in the AI Act we see that an inherent part of what is becoming ethical in AI is being outsourced to European standards bodies such as CEN, CENELEC, and ETSI. And these standards bodies actually don't have experience in that. They are also just going up as they go along. But because they're experts, they keep a much straighter face and not answer like most citizens in this survey. We don't really know how to influence it.
Just to add to what you just mentioned, some reflections. Not only standard bodies don't know, but they don't sometimes do gap analysis. So why more standards are needed? And so a bit of a gap analysis is missing in the big picture, which creates sometimes an overlap of very similar standards hanging out there. And in the background, there are citizens that are not even aware. So I will start by one of the ways of broadening citizen participation is just raising awareness. A very simple way could be that one. And I think there will be a fraction of society very much interested in knowing a bit more of transparency of these political processes, because they're very politicized as well.
Actually allow me to just for a minute wear again the boring hat of the project leader and say that the next step, because you asked where do we go from now, is to organize co-design workshops, which can mean different things, but essentially involve citizens in exercises of awareness raising, but also of exploring their boundaries, their preferences, and see how they can translate into standards. So at least encourage people to explore the topic. We are going to try to develop, so we're going to be joined soon by a legal scholar who is also an expert in citizen science methods. And the idea is to collaborate in devising viable ways to make people talk about technology and come up with their preferences, articulate better. So hopefully, at least for the people that are involved, which is by definition small scale, but we're going to develop a methodology for that as well. Some other people might pick it up and then replicate it. But the expectations there is that we are going to at least contribute to the way people think about standards and are able to articulate their preferences. Now, how do you go from awareness, which is a very important first step, to be able to intervene in the bodies that you two were talking about, or go and knock at Douwe's door and say, well, I want the municipality of Amsterdam to do this and that, please do it. That's another story, right? But at least we have to start from somewhere. But I think I would also like to point out what Marjolein said. I mean, it's probably everyone's responsibility, maybe of some of us, given we work in this line of business, but also some of you in this room, to contribute to this awareness raising and the articulation of this connection within values and technology, which is, as we've heard, extremely important, but also very well hidden for a variety of reasons. Yeah, I've seen one end there, and there was probably one, no, okay, one end there, and then one there.
Hi, thank you for the very interesting discussion. I'm Anouk Gene. I work at the Hogeschool in Holland as a researcher, also on digital rights, amongst others. And my question follows a bit up on this discussion, but I was particularly triggered by a remark from Marjolein, who said the values that citizens should care about are actually at the bottom of the list, like justice and sustainability, and other values like price of the product, I think, was at the top. And I agree with your point, I get it, but it triggered me because I was thinking it's quite a normative stance, which perhaps makes sense if we talk about values, right? But then, because then we expect something from citizens, but if we really look at their daily life practice, it also makes a lot of sense that they care first about price, right? So I was wondering who should adopt? Should the citizens have a different priority of concerns, or should we, as researchers, designers, philosophers, understand citizens' perspective better?
Yeah, excellent point. So that was exactly the provocation I wanted to happen. So I'm in the business of not researching how, for instance, citizens value values. I'm in the business of how should we as a society value technology, and that's the normative, that's the ethical. That's my work as an ethicist, obviously. The reason why I said that I was worried about this is not necessarily because I think that citizens are wrong or something, and it makes total sense that they list these things at the top of the list. What it actually reflects is how in politics, for instance, or how in society we actually discuss these things. And that's still rather in a very narrow individualistic sense. And where we conceptualize the use of your smartphone to like this individual experience of functionality and smoothness and so on, frictionless experience of the technology, so that everything works well and so on, and that you're not bothered by it and those kinds of things. But we rarely talk about the social dimensions, or maybe the ecological impact, or labor exploitation, or those types of themes. Also logical, because I think, well, we live in a super wealthy part of the world. We live in the global north. The most of these costs also end up with the people who produce the technology, or are living in the environments where, for instance, the minerals are being dug up and so on. We are actually on the receiving end of what we, for instance, call ethical technology or ethical AI, ironically enough, because ethical AI means that at some other part, or in some other part of the world, people are being exploited, or nature and climate is being exploited for our smooth experience of the technology. And that's something I worry about as an ethicist. And I guess that's and that's also, I had to laugh a little bit when the NWO said, well, yeah, let's use Dutch values. I was like, nah, that's not it. That's the opposite of the route we should take. And as many of the issues that we're dealing with we worry about, they are global, they are intertwined and relational, and that also means that we should take such a relational approach. But obviously, that insight that still has to sort of trickle down, and it also means that we have a responsibility, I guess, as researchers and but also as politicians and so on, to bring these items to the fore. That has to do with awareness, obviously. So it's I'm not blaming citizens at all, and I actually think it's really worthwhile looking into what people need. I sometimes wonder, we have a lot of people working on value-sensitive design, for instance, in ethics, where we look at how people value certain things or stakeholders, and then we try to weigh them and implement them in design and so on. But I sometimes wonder also, like, whether we should look at the values of people, or whether we should actually really look at their needs and ask them what they need in certain communities, and keep it very sort of community based, or in that sense. I don't know, but I hope that in the next coming years that we start to think more of technology not as this shiny tool in your hand that you sort of, and that the only issue you have is whether you are offline enough or something, but that it's something that's connected to so many practices that you cannot see behind that very shiny screen, so to say, but lots of things are happening there.
Yeah, maybe just to add, to follow up on this, I think values indeed are normative, but they have a kind of in-between role. So they are not strict norms, and they're also, they have some normative values. It's not that we are going to like completely pragmatist ethicist theories or something like that. It is more strongly normative, but yet it is not like so strong. And that makes them such a good way to think about technology. Because if we look at it, let's say, from a constructive technology assessment perspective, the idea is that while the technology is still developing, and I think standardization is part of the development of technology, we can still influence the process of the way it is going. And that has to do with a kind of value preferences. And, well, maybe also the discussion or the debate, if we find that some values are underrated over other values. I mean, there's also dilemmas between values. You can't, in some cases, you cannot have them all at once. You have to make a difficult choice between them. And this flexibility, and at the same time, normativity, I think, is one of the challenging things. I mean, it makes it also a bit vague, but also very useful, especially for deliberation processes. Just as my question also was, how do you come from, let's say, a very general value survey to, let's say, practical design things? I know in the realm of education, where also there's also a big push to do digitalization in education from a value perspective, I should say, to move from, let's say, very abstract, which at the same time are core values like justice, for example, towards more instrumental values like inclusivity, towards maybe even more instrumental values like accessibility. And then we can come to put a norm on that. How many people can have access to some kind of platform, yes or no? We can make decisions on that. Then you have a norm, and then you can come to a kind of design requirement, a technical design requirement. I think for standardization, you can also use this path to go from very abstract, let's say, value survey or something to a more concrete, more instrumental values, and then you. But it's not a straightforward process. Every step needs to be thought about, and there can be many directions. But in that process of deliberations, at some point, maybe citizens can be involved. And it may be a very local thing. It may be a European thing. I mean, it is of course a challenge of multi-level governance, and but still, if we have some kind of model like this, we can maybe put the citizens, involve the citizens at the right moment. Thank you.
Me? Okay. No, I just wanted to add. No, I don't want to speak again, but I just wanted to add something to it because some of the things, one of the things I've been working on for the last couple of years has also to do with like spheres or to context. Like so, you can ask people in general like what they value, but obviously this will change. In education, we value different things than we value in I don't know like versus the state or in state situations or from businesses. We have different expectations. We value different things in the market domain and so on. So, that makes it all the more complex because when you will ask citizens, it might make more sense to ask them in a very specific context, in this very specific practice, what they value, and then also how this value then is translated, going back to what you just said about norms and so on, and how we, like what parts of values we unpack. Because justice is huge. It can mean a ton of other, and encompass all kinds of other values, obviously. And I remember from the, from the report, that, for instance, like justice is phrased as that digital tools should be functional for everyone and shouldn't exclude certain users, like people with a disability, for instance. And but it can mean much more, of course, and according to different types of contexts and within different types of spheres. So that sort of spherical approach or context approach is actually quite important when we ask people what they need and what they value or what they care about. And it will also, and that's the difficult part, it will change under the influence of technology. For instance, when we have like large or big tech corporations all of a sudden working in the health domain, it will change the way we value within that domain. If we think that values like care and I don't know, maybe empathy or whatsoever are central to a sphere like that. But for years and years and years, that sphere becomes regulated by big tech actors who focus on efficiency or productivity or those types of other things, then our values will shift and it will change the roles of the people who are part of that sphere. So, and that's also, of course, who are the citizens? They are also the experts in those spheres, the people who take certain roles that come attached with virtues and values and certain norms and practices and so on. So it's actually quite difficult, I guess, but I don't know. Just wanted to mention it in that sense. Yeah, values are complex. Yeah.
You know, I think that the work you have been doing together also with Tamar Sharon, it's been tremendously useful, but no but. No but at all. No, this has been really cool. I think we should also, the thinking about values is advancing very fast and getting much better, but I think it stands in no relation to the corporate violence, greed, and extractivism. So I don't think we need to wait until we have the perfect value system. We should significantly reduce corporate power in technology. And for that, I don't think we need to develop a new framework. We have one that we agreed on after the Second World War, when countries still agreed, and those were human rights. And we agreed in 1947, then we had the UN guiding, then we had the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, was not human rights law, that became in 1967, then we had two treaties because there was the Cold War, so it was the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, and the Covenant for Social and Economic Rights. And then in the 70s, we realized, wow, it's not just states that impact human rights, but also companies. So there has been a very long and very good corporate responsibility work that resulted first in the UN Global Compact, that you might have not heard about, but it gave rise to a concept known as corporate social responsibility, which in that case meant, here we have an oil spill, there we'll build a school, so we're fine. So, and then the community realized this is not enough. So the UN set up a committee led by John Ruggie, which would realize the Ruggie principles, also known as the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, for which we're still fighting to make a binding treaty. But what really worked is that transformed the financial industries, the garment industries, because it introduced something that's called chain responsibility. So Nike said, we do not have shops in Bangladesh, so it's not our problem. I said, no, but you buy from them, so it's your responsibility. And that changed a lot. But now the digital sector says, like, we're special. We need our own kind of AI ethics. We need to think so much more about all these complex things. No! You should take your responsibility and show that you do so, and do so based on human rights impact assessments as described in the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. And yes, we can make better principles, but let them do the work instead of let us do the work, because they are over-resourced, they're not paying taxes, so our salaries are not being paid by them. So like, they should be doing the work, and I think we should not be hesitant in asking, in telling them, you should be doing the work, and if you asking for better, for what should exactly be done, you should also be doing the research into that. Because if you break it, you fix it. So, and a lot of the problems we currently have are caused by these companies, and they shouldn't outsource the costs on us to find out how they should be fixed. And I think that is also what this report is about.
3 questions, and 10 minutes, and 5 speakers.
So a very quick question. So I'm a technologist, actually, and I think, is there a role for technology in actually helping inform the standards making process from the values that we saw in the survey? Do you see that as a potential intervention route?
Shall we, in the interest of time, gather the 3 questions and then go around the table?
Hi, thank you. My name is Jantien Borsboom. I work for Public Spaces. We're a foundation, and we're trying to create an internet based on public values. And I was wondering, because if you're trying to include public values into standards, then it assumes that they are like fixed. But sometimes they can also be in conflict. For example, privacy versus accessibility. So how do you think we should treat this? This is my question.
Hi, my name is Milan Driessen. I work for Ipsos E&O. I was a question to Niels because I was kind of confused. Should people be involved in standard making, or should companies be involved in standard making? And if the latter question is or the answer is yes, how do people relate to the standardization from companies which are not public? So the companies which are not public, if it's not a public company, so let's say a company with a state owner, how does the public then influence this company or the standardization made by this company?
So before we go back to the stage, anyone else pressing questions? Otherwise, this is your last chance. Okay, you keep them for the drinks. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can answer the question of the first gentleman here about the use of technology actually to support, let's say, the citizen engagement. Or I don't know if that's exactly what you meant, but we've done some research using, let's say, digital means to enhance the participation of citizens in decision making and all kinds of policy issues. So I think the answer is yes. And you have this on a very local level, using kind of special developed platforms or applications to have decision making, but also there are several countries like Germany and France who have a kind of civil platform in which the politicians have said that they have a kind of binding advisory role. And to reach out to a lot of people, you need this kind of digital means to get the deliberation process going. So we actually have a report on that, and it's actually a very interesting way of moving forward. I think so. We cannot do without digital technology, but you should use it in the right way, and this is one of the ways that it can be properly used, I think.
But it clearly has the caveat that the report points out itself as well, that during the research that was done online, and you miss out some people. Even the people who filled in the research said themselves that they're not comfortable using digital technology, which is interesting. They came quite far filling out such a complicated survey. But clearly a lot of people you missed. So almost. Yeah, so you're both maybe in a position, and there's been great work also done here in the Netherlands, looking at citizen participation by digital means and the limits of that it has. But of course, you're kind of amplifying the same problem that is already there by leaving out a part of the population that also needs another channel to have their voices heard. Complementary, yes, I would say, but not as only an ends of a mean. Yeah.
But I will not.
I just have a quick reaction to your great question on conflicting values. Privacy versus safety, privacy versus accessibility, I think is definitely a balancing exercise, and it can sound very tacky, but I will say also leave courts to do this balance exercise. And recently, the European Court of Human Rights, just a few weeks back, has actually acknowledged that the right to encryption is a fundamental right to privacy. So we're reaching some good standards in that way, and I think that's where the balancing is happening in the right time as well.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add to that because I think it's a very relevant question, that standardization, and maybe that's also an open question to you, Stephanie, that I think can lead to some form of inequality in the future that we didn't really thought of. You know, there is code in the computers that we use today that was written, like, I don't know, in the 60s, and we can't get rid of it anymore. I think MIDI device is like a very annoying example, that some of the parts of the code is just going to be there with us. And because it's part of so many computers and devices, we can't get rid of it anymore. And I think that I was discussing this the other day, that there's a term called enveloping. Enveloping is the idea that at one moment the technology solution or the standard becomes that dominant and that strong that you will have to change reality to adapt to the standards. And the most horrible example I know of this is that in some parts in the US you see that all the front lawn lawns are all square because the lawnmowers can only do rectangle squares. You know, so you have to adapt reality. And actually, in the beginning of last year, there was a law passed in the US by Biden that said that humans in the future might need to wear transponders so that autonomous driving cars can actually see them. So you have to report on your own presence in order not to be killed by Tesla. So some people might say, great, there's a standard for human reporting in public areas so they don't get killed. But yeah, the standard setting here might also, push the security thing a little bit too far.
Yeah, so 3 great questions. I actually think no citizen participates in standardization because it's too expensive. It just takes too much time. It takes you need to hang out at the standards body for at least a year to understand what all these abbreviations mean, let alone and before you can have a leadership position and have significant impact, you need to hang out for 4 years and then get standing, which means going to all the meetings. And to make the meetings diverse, they take place in a different continent every time. And they take for about a week. So you need to be a week in a hotel on a different continent every time, right? So you need to be a very committed hobbyist, which I think goes beyond just general citizen engagement. So I think it's very important that as a citizen, standard processes are transparent and accountable. So, and I think there are over 300 global standards developing organizations, and I think that is where the question from Paul can really help. So like every standards body has over 50 working groups, and every working group mostly has several messages a day. So I think mailing list analysis, automated document analysis can do a lot to understand what conversations are going on, who are partaking, how is the representation. Work by Corinne Kath has shown exclusionary cultures of participation, that whereas the door is open, the threshold is very high. And you need to look pretty much, you like me, white, old, to participate successfully, right? So there are different ways, and these means should be taken down, and technology can play a role there, and also can help leadership in standards bodies understand how accessible they are and how well they are doing, and understand how well standards are considered. Is it just one person pushing it, or are it people from different companies from different parts of the world contributing to it? There's a great work to be done on a quantitative data analysis on standards documents and standards processes. And when it comes to balancing of values, I don't think technologists are very good at that. But that means they should document what they be doing. And I think that is part of what human rights impact assessments do, is they ask you what John Ruggie called, to know is to show. So you know you're developing a standard, you try to understand what potential impact it has, you try to discuss with stakeholders, and you document that. And when the situation changes, you can change the standard. But right now, standards are playing pretend that there is no outside world they're impacting. And that's simply not a game we can afford to continue playing.
So it's exactly 6:30. I think this is a great ending to today's session. It is indeed to be continued. You have heard Niels referring to the work of the little team here on the second row, Paul and Effie, were working on developing these computational ways of making sense of what goes on in standard bodies. Hopefully, next event can be about that. I'm just standing between you and the drinks, which are over there. But before closing, I think a lot of people deserve thanks here, because every effort that you see is, of course, always a collective effort. And I list them here. I want to make sure I get them all. Paul and Effie, I just mentioned them. Martin Trans, that was helping here on the background, is a project manager with us. And he replaced Jeroen de Vos, who was sitting here, and was very instrumental in making sure this survey actually happens. He worked super hard over the summer as well to take this home, so he cannot be thanked enough. Same goes to Martin, who took the baton from Jeroen. And then we also had some others, Mando, Rachovica, and Madelon, who have left the boat before the end, and Niels, as I already mentioned, that was also very much instrumental in getting us to where we are now. A big thank you goes to the Dutch Research Council, and I also would like to just say that we are looking for collaborators in whatever field you are, if be it involving citizens. With what I mentioned, it's going to be this co-design workshop experiment. We have to try to find ways to break the news and involve citizens in a more efficient manner. But also we're looking for a lawyer to collaborate with us. So if you can help, come forward. Thank you very much for being here with us, and please join me in thanking our fabulous speakers for sharing their knowledge.